in many ways, surveillance is about attention to personal details in order to manage, control, influence, entitle people to whatever it is. So there are many ways of thinking about surveillance, and it certainly isn't only something to do with police or intelligence services and so on. So yeah, I want to say it's become centrally important for the way organizations work today. In surveillance studies, well, you know, we can go back in political studies and sociology and think of a number of theorists who have been helpful. So in the classical period, perhaps one would look at Max Weber, for example, in his studies of bureaucracy, and how within a bureaucracy there is always a hierarchy of one official watching over another, who watches over another, and who keeps records. So again, the maintaining of records is important. So one can look at a number of theorists. In nearer the present day, Michel Foucault, and the work of Foucault has been very important for trying to understand disciplinary forms of surveillance, and particularly for Foucault, where people would self-discipline because they believed that they were being watched or regarded in some way. On a more specific surveillance studies level, people like Gary Marks, who worked in sociology and criminology, Oscar Gandy, who worked with communication, information technologies, and especially areas like marketing. James Rule, these three are all American. James Rule did work on, way back in the early 1970s, on the use of credit cards and driver's licenses and those kinds of everyday things as surveillance. That's a good question. Surveillance is as old as human history. People have always watched people for all kinds of reasons, and that, you know, that's not new. What is new is first the bureaucratic mode of surveillance, in which knowledge of the files, transmitting of the information, keeping the records, all these kinds of things become important, and it becomes systematic surveillance with modern bureaucracy. And then the next big shift in surveillance occurs when we have the new information and communication technologies. So we're talking now 1980s and onwards. So the past 30 years have been very significant for the development of new devices. Every device depends on the infrastructure first. Then you have things like radio frequency identification, the little tags that may be put in any kinds of goods for the control of stock in organizations. And that can also be put in clothing or appliances in the home or anything. RFID tags, radio frequency identification, are unique identifiers. So a barcode, the little code on a bar, could only identify a class of things. You know, it just told you that this code is on size 10 shoes. You know, that's all it told you. The RFID tag tells you it is this pair of shoes. So RFID tags, very specific, used more and more for many kinds of purposes. A number of different kinds of identification strategies, both local ones within organizations, like in the workplace where you have to put in a card at the beginning of the day when you arrive at work, again, electronically mediated, becomes more complex and more interesting when you move away from only CCTV that goes to a control room where there are physical people who are watching the images. Once the images are digitized, then iris scans, facial recognition, fingerprints, all these kinds of things may be included or connected with images of people either moving around in public places or going through specific channels, like into a theatre or a stadium or an airport or some specific place where their image can be captured in a very neat way. So all those things count as new surveillance devices, and there are many more. Looked at most generally, many more relationships than was previously the case are mediated electronically by all kinds of means. So many of our conversations today are not only by telephone, but by cellular telephone. And that itself makes a big difference. Plus messaging and all those other kinds of mediations of human relationships. I think that we do have to ask big questions about our reliance and dependence on electronically mediated forms of communication. And yes, I do think it makes a big difference. And it raises questions at the level of trust, especially. And you were asking about whether these new media might mean we lose face-to-face. I think what it means is that a smaller proportion of our relationships is actually face-to-face. So it's not so much a loss as a change of focus. It's very difficult to conceive of a world where, face-to-face relations are somehow gone. But it is significant that more relationships that we have are mediated, and moreover, that the quality of those relationships becomes shallower the more there are, because you simply can't maintain all these relationships with hundreds of people who are supposedly your friends on Facebook, or that you have even on your address list for email, to refer to something that is now old-fashioned in some ways. The relationship between films that are, if you like, science fiction and the real world is a complex interrelation where the one is not simply a reflection of the other. So if we take the case of Minority Report, Steven Spielberg did a lot of research on the new technologies before he made the movie. And he was trying to discover what was just around the corner, what the technology companies were about to market. And so he hoped that in his film he would be able to portray a world that was just coming into being. And of course the strange thing is that Minority Report came out in 2002, just a few months after 9/11. And the very techniques that were being used by what was going to be called Homeland Security in the United States are there, visible in Minority Report. So, did Spielberg foresee 9/11? I don't know, but it's a very interesting interrelation. And the means of marketing and so on, interactive marketing, very obvious there's a mannequin in the movie that speaks to the consumer as he or she goes past the mannequin, and there's an immediate interaction between them. But the very idea of the pre-cogs, there were three female characters who were kept in a liquid, and these were the pre-cogs in Minority Report. And the basic idea of the movie is that you could foresee the future, and the task of the police was to stop the crime occurring before it happened. And so there are a lot of very fast scenes where police go out to stop a murder just before it happens, rather than arriving on the scene after the person is dead to try to work out who did it. But this is exactly what Homeland Security wanted to do. They wanted to be able to say, before the event, this is who is going to be the terrorist, and to try to stop the event happening before it did. And so Minority Report, as a surveillance movie, marks a very important moment where there's a shift in surveillance from looking at the past and sort of extrapolating it into the future, or looking at the present, watching other people in the present, to saying, here's a future, what is going to happen. And so you have it in many cases, DNA, for example, trying to judge what kind of diseases people might have. Or in the case of crime, who are the likely persons who are going to commit these crimes? Let's try to change the situation before they do it. And in the United Kingdom, in Britain now, they're even trying to second guess, if you like, what children are going to be doing later in their lives. And so surveillance turns to the future, and you see it so clearly in Minority Report. So in many ways, these movies do have an intimate connection with what is actually going on.